Hello, everybody, and welcome to the None of Our Businesses Roundtable. We are now in what do they call it, guys?
Self-quarantine.
Self-quarantine, but it's not, the guideline doesn't say you need to necessarily quarantine yourself where we're at yet. It just says you should, social distance. You need to social distance. So we've all been working from home, and we're coming to you from home like many people around the country these days, working from home. And so rather than getting in a room close together, drinking and sitting in front of mics and doing our podcast that way, we're doing it via video conference and using Zoom. So here we are, and we're glad everyone can join us here, and we're going to do our thing. So maybe we want to kick it off. As always, with me today is AJ Wheeler and Charlie Zigman.
Hey, everybody.
And maybe we want to kick it off with the first article, AJ.
Yeah, so actually this week, the ProMeric, the people that do the CPA exam test centers, they went ahead and said that, among all the other businesses that we've seen during the coronavirus, shutting their doors or keeping large gatherings away, they closed the testing centers for the CPA exams. And so now people are wondering if they have an expiration date coming up and they were waiting to take their last test, whether they'll extend those deadlines. The other problem is most of the state boards that approve or would have the power to make that extension are currently on leave because of the coronavirus. So, and the social distancing that everybody's been asked to do. And so there's I'm imagining there's a lot of people that are kind of in limbo, and it could go, when this 30-day hold is up, it could go further if we're not out of this. So I, in fact, have one of my exams scheduled for the 24th of next month, or the 14th, I don't remember. But it's after this date here that they've shut it down. But who knows if I'll be able to even take that test yet. So it's yet to be seen. It's kind of day to day on this stuff. But I wanted to get your guys, because I know, Ty, you were in the education field for a long time, and students all the time on a regular basis would cram for this stuff. If you've been cramming and had a test coming up, it's unfortunate, but it's passed down.
Yeah, you got to figure it's a letdown, right? Because like you said, let's face it, most people who take the CPA exam, they are cramming that information in order to pass the exam, and everyone always uses that saying that the best or perfect score is the bare minimum score you need to just pass the exam. That's the proper way to do it, because that means you didn't do too much, but you did what you had to do, kind of thing. But I think, it's got to be a letdown for a lot of folks who have been in the midst of that, and now they're finding out, they can't even take it now. And so they're going to have to probably, depending on their process, may need to go through some things all over again just once they are rescheduled, right? So I'm sure that's got to be a letdown for a bunch of folks.
Talk at all about if their credits were set to expire, that they plan to extend that, because it definitely seems like something that they should do at the bare minimum.
Yeah, they did mention in the article that the NASBA, who does on the grading, has recommended that the boards extend all notices with expirations between now and June 30th to September 30th. But and then I guess the NASBA separately will identify all candidates that have credit expiring through June and provide information to the boards of accountancy with a recommendation to grant an extension. But again, all the boards right now are shut down, so they won't have an answer for a while.
So as an existing CPA, the thing that comes to my mind is in Oregon, we have a June deadline for continuing education, that existing CPAs have to finish continuing education, certain amount every, in most states, you have to finish a certain amount of credits every year. And in Oregon, at least, we have to submit reporting every 2 years of what we've done and the credits we've done to maintain our licensing. So yeah, this makes me wonder, will that get deferred? And not just wonder, but I would say it more strongly makes me hope that would get deferred. because like most CPAs, I'm usually running a little bit behind on my continuing education credits.
Yeah, and also too comes to mind is that today, actually earlier today, they went ahead and extended the tax filing deadline until July 15th from April 15th. So, but they highly suggested that if people had taxes, that they go ahead and file them and get their refunds rolling. But I think we haven't seen, this is a big ripple effect to this whole thing. I guess with not just the CPA exam being postponed, but also then the other article that we're going to talk about is the income tax filing deadline being moved.
I'm curious on that. Did they extend time to pay and time to file?
Yeah, they actually extended the time to pay first, or at least that was the original proposal. Actually, I'm not sure if I know the exact timelines in my head of what got passed when or at the same time or what, but the original proposal was to extend the time to pay until July 15th, or for 90 days anyway. And but the thought was they were going to still require filing, which meant most people would just extend and then figure out their tax return to file with payment if due by July 15th. But I think I mean, for me, it was like, okay, yeah, but why even put people through the filing the extension form then, right? So I was glad to see they just kind of made it more kind of straightforward across the board, that it's both an extension to file and pay to July 15th.
Well, it sounds good. I mean, I'm glad that there's some kind of lenience built into that process and that they're reacting in a way that actually helps taxpayers.
And in the article, actually, they did put a threshold on this. The delay is available to people who owe $1 million or less in taxes and corporations that owe $10 million or less. This is in the AP article. So
good call out. Not a particular issue in my world, but yeah, I mean, I think that does remind me that I remember listening to them talk about it or debate it as they were saying, oh, we're going to defer it except for really the most wealthiest taxpayers. You know, we're going to make sure they still pay on time, or something like that was in the discussions when they were rolling this out. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, if you're paying $1 million in taxes, you can deal with the coronavirus. That'll be, that's just fine.
Well,
so,
and making them deal with their taxes keeps all those accountants employed while the coronavirus is going on, right? They can't just lay off or defer their accountants. So that's good for our industry too.
Yeah. So we got that. And then another article I wanted to talk about is they're just speaking of basically the government trying to step in and help in relation to coronavirus. Mark Cuban has come out and made a quote. For those who don't know who Mark Cuban is, he's the outspoken owner of the Dallas Mavericks and also is active on the Shark Tank show where people come and pitch their investment ideas. And so what he's come out and said is that, hey, if we're going to do government bailouts, then we need to structure it in a way that it's going to actually reduce inequality. And so his recommendation on sort of how we structure those types of deals is that we say that if the government is going to give people money, that if the government is going to give companies money, that those companies should not be able to use that money to buy back treasury stock because it doesn't serve as much of a purpose to the world other than just boosting those stocks' prices. And so it's kind of a selfish and antithetical way to use bailout money. And so I kind of want to get your guys' take on whether or not he's right in that opinion and whether or not you think that it is realistic to set those kind of limitations on government bailouts.
Well, I can say I keep the news kind of going in the background while I'm working, and as of today, I was seeing in press conferences both Chuck Schumer and President Trump both reiterated those same concerns about stock buybacks, corporations doing stock buybacks, and the concern over that. So yeah, I don't. Mark Cuban's concern is in the political sphere, and sounds like there's probably enough will there that they could structure it so that that's not allowed if they desire to. At least lip service is being paid to it as of today.
Okay, so the other interesting thing he said about it is that he said that not only should they not be allowed to do it, but they shouldn't be allowed to do it ever, not 20 years from now, because I guess he believes that they will be able to set themselves up for a longer term move and basically not do the stock buyback today, but make long-term plans with the money that would enable them to do it once things have sort of settled down. And so I thought maybe that was a little bit more of a controversial add-on to it because it's a longer term, 20 years down the road might be a different scenario or a different analysis. So yeah, I guess I want to get your take on that.
Would you even be able to do that though? I mean, you could, trash an entity and start a new one, basically, and then you would be able to buy back your treasury stock. I mean, not trash one, but shut down an entity and start a new one, and then you would have that legacy around. I'm just wondering how they would enforce something like that.
It seems difficult to enforce. Yeah.
I think they're in a lot of ways talking about larger public companies which would make big maneuvers like that maybe less likely, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, you can see both sides of the issue. It's like, yeah, I mean, corporate planners have the resources and the strategists to take bailout money and sit on it and then use that for a buyback sometime later. So you can see that point, but then on the other side, it's like, well, so if you need a bailout and you take it now, you're signing away your ability to have a stock buyback in perpetuity. That that also seems like it seems like it will discourage a lot of companies from taking those buybacks or take buybacks. Discourage a lot of companies from taking the bailouts. I think the thought is we want to discourage companies from doing those buybacks with taxpayer money, but yeah, I think that if they're too extreme with the standard on it, they could, like a ban on any stock buyback ever in the future, they could definitely discourage people from taking needed money. And the thing you have to consider, the thing I always consider about corporate America is that the management, this is a cynical view of mine, but the management of corporate America, sometimes it is that there's enough moral hazard in our system that sometimes it is kind of an all or nothing proposition for them. So if you're a corporate manager, a corporate CEO, the proposition for you might very well be, well, I need to have the stock buyback as a strategy in the future. So I would rather run this company nearly to the ground and take that risk right now so that I don't take government money, which means a lot of hurt for probably a lot of employees and people that we're trying to benefit. I might rather do that than take the government money if it means that I can't ever engage in a stock buyback in the future. So I think there are some potentially weird outcomes if the regulations are too extreme. Well, you're up, AJ. What's the next article to share here?
This one's a good one, actually. Charlie and I posted the same article without knowing it, so it must be a good one. This one is before the corona. That's labeled before the corona crash. Many big corporations booked the number one rule of personal finance, and what they're talking about is an operating reserve, and how a lot of corporations didn't have any kind of operating reserve in place. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of them need big bailouts right now, is because they weren't stashing cash away to cover 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. So I thought it was really interesting. It was something that I was thinking about before the article even came out, was I'm wondering why these companies, if they were financially savvy enough, that's kind of what I preach a lot in my nonprofit world, is coming up with, 3 to 6 months of operating expenses before you start thinking about, other investments, because in that world, the donations and the support can wane from year to year. It's really dependent on policy that's put in place, tax policy, whether or not the contributions are deductible. But it's one of the things I strongly preach. And I found it surprising that these big corporations were in the similar situation that many small nonprofits are, where they didn't have a financial safety net or an operating reserve. And so I thought it would be interesting to kick around and see if that's happened with other clients of yours, and I'm sure it has. or if you found this surprising or
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is that like they even had McDonald's who had like 21 billion in revenue and ended with only 898 million in cash. And I think like my take on it is that it's one of those things that everybody believes to an extent and everybody knows it's the right thing to do, but it's a lot easier to do than it is to say. And it's one of those things that when you're evaluating all of these different options of how to spend money, the idea of saving it is often not as interesting or as appealing to companies as it maybe should be. And it's easy to think that a virus or, that some kind of big disaster isn't going to happen. And so I think, I kind of get both sides of it. But yeah, I did find it surprising that some of the bigger ones like McDonald's were not more prepared for something like this.
I actually would, when it comes to large companies, I'd actually take a contrary view. But I would preface just by first saying, I think there is a big difference on this subject between small privately held businesses and large companies. And when you ask the question like you did, AJ, do we see this? Yeah, with the small to mid-sized privately held businesses that we generally work with, I see clients that are not maintaining sufficient cash reserves all the time, and that's one of the pieces of advice that we're always working with them on is helping them calculate and figure out what kind of cash reserves they should be keeping, and then sometimes helping them put them on a plan of how to build up those reserves to be more sustainable over the long run. But the reason why that I might advise that with kind of your smaller to mid-sized businesses is that their access to capital is usually less to begin with. Their ability to raise capital is less, and they have they kind of have a different way of impacting the overall economy. And so when you look at a large business, the reason why this article is a little bit surprising to me is that if you don't have to go back very far. If you go back at just a year or so, we had been saying it'd been kind of a common question in the business community of why are large companies sitting on cash, and that was actually more kind of a questionable issue and potentially symptomatic of a coming recession, because what you expect in an engaged and growing economy is that the large companies are spending their money on investments. They're spending their money on investing in growth and investing in new projects, and they are spending their money on employees to operate their businesses, and they're spending their money on giving money back out to the investor class that is invested in them. And that's kind of what we want the large public companies to do, because from my perspective, because you want that money to go back out in the form of shareholder dividends, shareholder returns, or employee wages. You want to go back out to the stakeholders, the individual and natural people that make up the consumer base of the economy, right? So you don't want large companies just sitting on piles of cash, because that doesn't drive the economy forward if you believe, like I do, that our economy is a consumer-based economy. And so from my perspective, I'm not as likely to spank these large companies for having run thin at this point. Of course, it depends. It depends on what they were doing with their cash, right? But if they were running thin on cash because they were getting it back out to consumers in some regard, whether through investors or employees or a combination of both, hopefully, then I think that is kind of one of their roles in the economy. That's what they should be doing, and it signifies that if they weren't sitting on piles of cash, that they had a belief in the economy, that they weren't sitting on a pile of cash because they believed that the economy was going well and that they didn't need to hoard cash in that way. So yeah, I would say that from that perspective, I don't necessarily think it's bad on those companies to have been running thin on their cash reserves, as well as I also find it a little surprising that they were, because we were making the opposite complaint that they were sitting on piles of cash reserves, and that was signifying coming problems with the economy.
And in the article, it also notes that this isn't the case with all these large companies. They cited the cruise ship industry as reinvesting the profits into the business and not necessarily dividending it out or increasing salaries or anything like that. They reinvested in the business itself. And so now that they did exactly what you're talking about were prescribed to do, but now they're in a cash shortage because they followed the advice of those planners and the consensus to put that money back into the business or invest in their employees and such, and not just sit on the cash or distribute it to the dividends. But they chose option B or C and reinvested in the businesses. So, and it is something that I think was preached two for-profit businesses recently, like you said a year ago, was to use their cash positions to bolster the business or continue to grow it.
Yeah, and they're kind of a special case because they're such a luxury product that, like, right now I find it hard to imagine that no matter what they had done with their cash, that they would be in a good position at this point, because it's one of those things that is like that isn't popular right now in this environment. But
well, I think they've been saying that I don't know. They've been saying, I sound like President Trump, but I think that's who I heard it from on a news conference, was this idea that they might repurpose the cruise ship fleet into doing something. I don't know if it was for medical ships or something else that could be used in the effort to deal with the coronavirus temporarily. So yeah, that could be a good outcome, or a good way to make use of it. Because yeah, you got to imagine they probably don't have a lot of passengers, if they're even allowed to. I haven't paid attention to that.
Yeah, I think most travel is just kind of shut down as it is. It mentions
right.
Airlines and cruise ships. I don't think anybody's packing a cruise ship right now.
Right. Yeah.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the coronavirus hasn't hit every industry equally hard, as you might imagine. One industry that seems to be booming at a time like this is actually the marijuana industry. We have an article from Bloomberg that is talking about how at this point in time, they looked across the board to see that cannabis sales had raised in all sorts of different markets and all different types of cannabis and that sort of a thing. And the article talks about that some of it may come from pantry loading, but because it was so, like, buying a lot of it to be ready, but then because it was so uniform in the fact that purchasing had gone up, it seemed reasonable to believe that there was going to be an increase in consumption. And so I guess I want to get you guys' take on whether or not you think that it makes sense that at a time where people are self-quarantined, that they would jump out and go buy some cannabis.
Well, I think it probably follows the same as tobacco and alcohol. I think both of those in times of depression or recession rise. And I think it was mentioned in the article, I think, that those sales rise, just like I think fast food and all that other comfort kind of numbing effect, secondary stuff that people enjoy or use as a form of escapism, or, a safety blanket, or use whatever analogy you want to use. But those kind of things are kind of, what do they call it, a defensive category, or a luxury good, or one of those that inversely kind of, I don't want to say recession proof, but I think people tend to gravitate toward those kind of things during natural disasters or depressions or recessions or whatever it was.
Yeah, counter cyclical. I mean that's a question that I've had. My underlying assumption was that it would be counter cyclical, just like you said, that it'd be similar to alcohol, but recreational cannabis in Oregon, for example, came about, and the industry was built during good times, right? During a period where we don't have where we weren't having a recession. So we really didn't know. I mean, from my perspective, we didn't know based on the data from the legal or the state legal industries out there. We didn't know if it was going to be countercyclical or not. So, this is actually history in the making to see this, to be able to have this data and know, oh yeah, what we might suspect is true, that it is countercyclical. And I think what's going to be just as interesting and perhaps more for those of us that are a little more nerdy on the accounting side and work with the cannabis industry is the nuances and the detail in that, in the sense of, well, does it matter? Does the brands matter? Does the price point matter? Does the quality matter? Does the nature of the product matter? Are certain types of cannabis products counter-cyclical, but others are not? And so I think that'll be interesting as this unfolds. That never waste a good crisis, right? So that'll be interesting to see if that data becomes available and develop some understanding of that for that industry.
Your cost accounting was showing there as you were rattling off all the. But no, I have to agree. I think that out of this, hopefully this whole crisis doesn't last too long, but I think out of this will come some really important data. Already, I think it's come out where we've seen, we often talk about essential needs of doctors and nurses and everything, but also too now we're really seeing the kind of impact that grocery workers have, food service workers, kind of the jobs that everybody kind of bags on, I think, really have a huge impact on our day-to-day lives. And I think people are turning kind of understanding better about the role that those jobs and those positions hold in society. And I think, the pandemic is awful, of course, but if people are going to recognize those kind of workers and see them more essentially instead of just a stock person or a grocery worker or a delivery driver or something like that, I'm hoping that brings everybody together a little bit more. And marijuana, if it brings people together, then even better.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And it's I saw another thing that was talking about, another article that was just talking about what some of the silver linings have been in this whole pandemic, and I think that's one of them that you're finding there. People have been talking about how traffic is great and how pollution has been way down and a lot of other good things. I saw an article talking about how the fact that it's forcing everybody to work from home is causing employers to realize that that is a realistic option for them. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously this is overall a terrible thing, but there definitely are a few silver linings that are good to, acknowledge.
Well, I think, on the working from home topic, which is not, yeah, I mean, what I feel like is, well, just speaking from my own experience, the technology to work from home has been available to me for a long time, but culturally, I didn't do it as much. I mean, I would do some work from home, but I had a cultural and philosophical bias to work in the presence of the people that I am serving or working with. And so I haven't used work at home infrastructure and technology to its max, although it's been available to me. Like, I've done more video conferencing since this thing started than I had in like 2 years probably, even though and I didn't have to, the technology was all there because I had it available to me. I just didn't do it as a regular thing. And so I wonder, and I suspect that, well, I would say that as a question or just a wondering out loud, how many other people are like that, where it's been available to them, but the crisis is pushing them to start using tools and things that have been available that they just weren't using because they didn't have to. They didn't have to make that mental effort to flip the switch and start doing things differently until now.
I actually was wondering the same thing because I, like you, Ty, I've had the ability to work remotely with a lot of my clients, but again, I felt, I guess, the necessity to go over and see them and have face-to-face with them in person. And, now that's not available. So making use of the technology that's at our fingertips, and for the most part, it's free to people. And then also the infrastructure of us of working remotely and being able to leverage that to its fullest. I don't think we took it. And I was wondering the same thing, because I just talked to a colleague that works at an accounting firm that's traditionally paper, and for the longest time they said they were never going to go digital, and now they're having to make the switch, out of necessity, and deal with clients remotely and work remotely and go paperless. So it took this kind of pandemic to turn them to realize that this is kind of the new normal. But I think where you have to see how this plays out, like if this only lasts another week, which I don't think it will, then I think everybody might be able to turn back and say, okay. But if it plays out longer, and I think it will, the way that everybody's talking, I think everybody, just like the Great Recession and the Great Depression had in the past, will change people's attitudes and their behaviors for a while, like for a good long while, I think.
Well, I think it's another one of those. I think for me, it's another one of those interesting data experiments. In just like you said, like if this lasts long enough, can it actually change people's habits? And I think about it as a nature versus nurture argument, because I wonder about that point. Like if we just all become familiar and with using video conferencing technology and not being physically present with each other, do we then all become okay with it? Or is there something inherent in our nature as human beings that even if this lasts for 6 months to a year, once it's possible for people to kind of get out and be physically present with each other again, do we just revert back to that because that's in our DNA kind of thing, right? And I say that, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's a mix of both. And I just to kind of give like not a counterpoint here, but just another angle on it. I know that like for me personally, I've been able to work remotely as far as, privilege goes. Like I've had bosses who are okay with it and that sort of a thing. And I've had the technology, but I've always personally found myself to be more productive in an office environment where I'm close to the people that I need to speak with and the people that I need to talk to. And so I don't think that for me personally, that's ever really going to change. So yeah, that's just kind of my counter view on it. And so I kind of do envision that if we get back to normal, that I do envision myself going back to the office and, working more of a normal life, because I just think that oftentimes is a more effective approach. But I totally get why people who have put it off for a long time and now are forced into it would then, grow to accept it and get used to it and maybe find it better than what they were used to.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this from even before the COVID-19 crisis. I thought about a similar topic that I think relates to this from an anthropology perspective, from an anthropological perspective, because for myself, I'm a classic introvert. I'm out there in terms of putting out content, and I've been a lecturer at university, and I don't have a problem with getting on a stage and putting on a show kind of thing. But I actually prefer a lot of alone time and not necessarily, and I don't have as much of a need to be in the presence of others as I see other people, my family, my friends, my colleagues sometimes do need. And I frame that in the context of what the leading anthropologists are saying in terms of the most recent research on the evolution of human beings, is that our communal nature is the way our DNA has developed, that our DNA has developed over time for us to be more communal, and that also theoretically has helped with the progression of mankind. And I've kind of thought about, oh, well, then I guess I'm like the one that failed to evolve, because, frankly, like this week has been kind of cool for me to like be at home and have some social distance from people. I'm actually like, there's a certain part of me that kind of likes it, and so I'm like, but I look at it, but I bring it back to the question I was asking a minute ago in terms of, yeah, but if I'm the abnormal one, then back to your point, AJ, is like, I'm not sure that just because we have to do this for a while, it's going to train us into doing it if it's in our DNA to want to actually get together in person.
Well, I think it's just like anything. This whole thing has like really made me kind of rethink. Like, I didn't know how much I touched my face during one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, me either.
Right?
Well, do you think it makes you want to do it more too? Like, I feel like I have itches that I didn't have before.
Well, everybody keeps talking about it. Like,
Right.
it's making me want to do it right now.
I have facial hair. I'm like, and so I get like itchy face. I mean, I've caught myself on video like about 10 times itching my face or doing something on my face. So but I guess I'm just, and my eyes get tired a lot when I look at a screen and I rub them. They're behind glasses. And I just really like started realizing how much I do it. Like, and I don't think, so I think the social distancing and this move probably, it's probably just bringing out like either the fact that you, like Ty's probably one end of that example where he's really enjoyed this like social distancing or like some alone time, and I think it probably has done the exact opposite to a lot of many other people where they are like now craving some kind of human interaction. I myself, I kind of go back and forth. I need my alone time, but I definitely work better when I'm like face to face with somebody or I'm having a like in-person kind of interaction. Like, to be completely honest, it was really difficult at the beginning of the podcast just because I'm so used to like body language of seeing everybody around the table and us being able to like shoot the shit and be boys really quick before we get onto the podcast. And so it was kind of like trying to do that same thing via a computer screen or on the phone. I guess it's a muscle I haven't flexed yet, and I think a lot of people are probably like either are going to need to flex new muscles in this new normal of either remotely or if we go back to like an augmented, version of what it was before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of off what you said. Some people are probably, if they're the opposite of Ty, if they're opposite of me, they are, the social distancing is driving them crazy. And I think actually that there is a potential outcome here that I haven't heard people talking about too much, but I do worry about because I do observe the people who are like the complete opposite of me, and I do worry, like, are we going to have some high rates of depression and even some fatalities potentially of people who are just who are suffering from the treatment is actually worse than the disease in some cases for some people. I wonder if that's possible.
Definitely seems plausible because, yeah, I think it's a big adjustment for a lot of people. And like you're saying, people need that social interaction. And so, yeah, I could see that as an outcome, a possible outcome.
Yeah, let's hope our mental health professionals are thinking about this and are getting ready to kind of speak out about best practices and so on. If they haven't, they probably have, and I haven't seen it yet.
Well, it's an interesting point because I work with actually a couple organizations, nonprofit organizations that are centered around mental health and then addiction. And a lot of what they do is group meetings. Like that person-to-person connection is like really vital. If you listen to the recent podcast that we put out with the executive director of Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon, she states clearly that their big deliverable is peer support mentoring, and that they have groups, and that's how people really like connect with their recovery effort, is to be around other people like in person, to help through that recovery journey. And I think the same is true with like AA or NA or any of those alcohol or Narcotics Anonymous, where it's this group setting where nobody's judged and they come together. And I'm just wondering how that's all going to work now that we're in a digital realm. And in fact, I've heard a couple of addiction people just in that community are really scared for people's sobriety going away based on this because they don't have that person-to-person connection for support. And I don't think you have to go as far as the addiction and mental health fields. I think, to your point, everyday people, or not everyday people, but everybody I think deals with either too much socialization or too little socialization at some time. It has an adverse effect on their mood and their outlook.
Well, and then you take that and it compounds with the thing we were talking about earlier, how when people are stuck inside, they tend to go to comfort type products like tobacco or alcohol or whatever their, vice is. And so you've got the social element to it. You've got the comfort element to it. And so, yeah, it seems like a perfect storm for people who are having those problems to relapse back into them. Yeah.
And I think just to compound the issue, we actually are pretty fortunate, all of us that are us being on this call and being able to do something like this, right? Because it actually isn't a universal truth that everybody has the technology or the budget to have a high-speed internet connection and the computer setups and the webcams and and all of that. Yeah, I think there is. Maybe I'm somewhat wrong about that. I think because going back to the fact that I haven't fully utilized available technology, I think there's probably a lot of stuff you can do on your smartphones too, with FaceTiming and maybe some web conferencing without a lot of high-tech equipment. But still, for a lot of folks that may be on a limited budget, even their ability to have a high-speed internet connection that allows for that kind of thing meant going to a cafe or the library or something like that they can't do right now.
All right, everybody, that's been our podcast. I really want to thank you all for taking the time to listen, and please share it with your colleagues, like, subscribe, do all the different things. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thank you. Everybody stay healthy, stay safe. Have a good weekend.